This is the Investor Connect Kiwi Tech 2022 podcast series. In this series, we discuss trends and topics in the startup world. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Investor Connect is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors and startups for fundraising. Please consider donating $100 to the program to help others in their investor and entrepreneur journey. You can find the donate button on the investorconnect.org website. Thank you for having us today on this panel about lessons learned using a product-led growth strategy in a SaaS business. I'd like to have the panel for the session come on. If you could go ahead and start your video and unmute. We have starting with us, J.R. Garcia. J.R., can you start with a little bit about yourself and what your firm does?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me, Hall, and everybody here. And yeah, good afternoon, good morning, depending upon where you are. As Hall mentioned, my name is J.R. Garcia, part of a firm called Green Park and Golf, or GPG Ventures, here in Dallas, Texas. And essentially, we are an early stage investment firm. And I know that is a pretty broad definition, but we're investing mostly healthcare. So like 75% healthcare and 25% in other industries, mainly tech. And even within healthcare, investing across software companies, med device, and drug development companies. So it's a pretty broad definition of healthcare. We have been around for about 11 years now and invested in about 100 unique companies over that time period. So been with the firm since the beginning, kind of shaped who we are today, and joined the 16 members across Dallas and Houston. So Texas-centric, but we'll invest anywhere. And that's the very short intro to me and GPG.
Great. Thanks, JR. Next up is Aniket Kumar. Aniket, can you tell us about yourself and your firm?
Yeah, thanks, Hall. Very nice to meet everybody on the call and excited to be here. So as Hall, you mentioned, my name is Aniket Kumar. I am an engineer by background. I worked in the energy industry in Houston, close to where JR is, developing software products, transitioned over to the investing world after a successful stint in that industry. And I've been with Software Growth Partners for about more than 3 years now. A little bit more about SGP as a firm. We focus on software companies. We are based here out of California on the West Coast, focus on investing on software companies, especially in the companies that are slightly more mature than early stage startups, but companies that are in the 2 to 20 million of ARR range, still small and have a lot of good potential. So we come in with a mindset of, acquiring majority in those companies, in such mature companies, and helping provide capital to build a lot of infrastructure that is needed to scale these companies to take them to the next level. So investing in sales and marketing, investing in building the infrastructure that is needed to provide customer support, customer success. So very excited for the discussion today and excited to be here.
Great. Thanks, Aniket. And next we have Brendan White. Brendan, can you tell us about yourself and your firm?
Sure. Great to be here. Thanks, everybody. Brendan White, the CEO and co-founder of Cortex. We're an early stage software company based mostly in Boston, but half of a remote team, but with a core group in Boston. What Cortex does is it's a B2B SaaS platform that applies machine learning to visuals to understand visuals like ads and videos, photos, make them more investable for companies. So companies, customers like Toyota, Marriott, L'Oreal, they're kind of the best of the best. They spend $600 billion a year on this problem. Right now, they kind of wing it. And Cortex is almost like a Google Analytics for visuals, to help them not have to wing it anymore, basically. And as relevant today, we started as an enterprise kind of direct sales company and moved to product-led growth and saw some big changes there. So I'm happy to share that today.
Great. Thanks, Brendan. For those in the audience, if you would like to post your questions, time permitting, we'll address those as well. But with that, let's go and kick off with our current panel here with the questions. First question I'd like to ask the panel and have you weigh on is, what is the main trend in the SaaS space you see going on today? JR, can you kick us off with that one?
Yeah, well, not to kick it off with kind of a sour note, but I think over the past 6 months, we're kind of seeing some SaaS multiples compressed. So, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think just keeping it real for all the entrepreneurs that they're raising money, looking at public comps, that's important to gauge your peers and kind of see what's going on. So I'll lead off with that. But I think elsewhere, in the private side, you're seeing, I think, really interesting, kind of nimble opportunities and teams kind of spring up and kind of attack new markets, new problems with solutions. And so it's something that we as investors kind of keep an eye on, is new entrants as well as public companies. And so, have conversations every day with CEOs and raising rounds, big and small. And as you're seeing markets in general become more efficient, you're always kind of competing against dollars elsewhere. And so as entrepreneurs, it's important to be well aware of that, in fundraising mode. But I think we're still seeing really competitive rounds get done. So, have a few companies in the market right now, raising $15 to $30 million kind of rounds, and still seeing, competitive term sheets, competitive processes. And so I don't want to put a damper on it too much. I just want to, make sure people are aware of it. And I know you see headlines about stock markets here and there, and it's, for the most part, people say it doesn't really affect private markets, but it does. It has a trickle-down effect. And so I think just be cognizant of that. And I think that's one thing we're kind of keeping an eye on right now, is kind of seeing how things play out in this first quarter, into the first half of this year. That's from my desk.
Great. Thanks, JR. And Aniket, what's the main trend you see going on today in the SaaS world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd just like to echo what JR mentioned, Paul. I think absolutely valuations have been frothy, and now we are seeing some compression, and obviously with an eye on the public markets. However, I think, coming back to the point that Brennan was mentioning, I think we see this as a growing trend as companies that have put together products, right, for the large enterprise markets are adjusting their product capabilities to get in line with SaaS product-led growth strategies, because that is where I think a lot of scalability will happen over the next 5, 10, 15 years or so. So we absolutely feel that companies need to reinvent themselves. And we see that day in and day out as we talk to more and more founders who have invested dollars to build enterprise class solutions, but have to reinvent themselves a little bit from a product perspective so that they're able to take it forward. So I think that's where a lot of value will be unlocked over the next 5 to 10 years in the SaaS ecosystem, which is how easy or efficient is it to deploy your product, and how easy or efficient is it for you to scale going forward.
Great, thanks. And Brennan, what's your take on that question? What do you think is the main trend we're seeing in SaaS right now?
Yeah, I'd like to echo Aniket's second point. I think the biggest trend we're seeing is around product-led growth being the preferred buying method from the purchasers. This is my second startup. In our first startup, we bootstrapped and sold to the same exact customer, enterprise style. And that still works. You can absolutely still build a business that way. Was a huge part of Cortex's beginning. But it seems like everyone is getting more educated, and they're seeking out the content that they want to learn about their space, and they want to engage on their speed. And so being a company that kind of leads with product and makes it where the customer can educate themselves and go at their own pace, and then either engage or sign up, perhaps without even talking to someone on the team, that's a huge advantage. And that, we can speak to it firsthand, but, I'm a Techstars alum, and that's true across all of the people I've been working with in the past few years.
Great. Well, let's move to what is a product-led growth strategy? And one of the questions from the audience is, what does it mean to lead with a product? Aniket, can you kick us off there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I would say, Paul, that there are 3 pieces in our mind as we think of product-led growth strategy, right? I think the first one being that the product is easy to set up, deploy, easy to use, configure, right? So that you don't have to have heavy lifting needed at the front end. The second is the product sells itself, where people are trying to try the product, use a freemium version, use a try-buy motion. And then, they are trying to ramp up and get to the next level of usage as the product continues to grow and scale. And the third piece, which is also very critical, is the product is capable enough in its own strength to serve its customers. As Brennan's saying, I think this is the major trend that we see, that, as more and more individuals are buying software, the old traditional way of buying software is changing. And folks don't want to reach out to your customer support team to get their questions answered. They want to figure it out themselves. So having that capability that the product is either, has good documentation, has good wizards that are built in so that everybody can address those issues that they see themselves. I would say that is the third piece. So that's the main trend that we are seeing, with respect to how do you set up this product-led growth strategy, and what are the building blocks that you need to have in place so that you can, kick this off, have a good solid foundation, and then scale from there on.
Great. And JR, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think, entrepreneurs asking, what is product-led? And what it is shortening for me is it's hyper-focused on that time to value, right? I mean, and you kind of said, it's people who want to buy for themselves. And so it's something that has been developed, and you're kind of building with the end user in mind, right? Where they can purchase or use something with extremely fast setup, low friction, and have a value in the first, depending on what the product is, as soon as possible. And so I think in contrast to sales-led or marketing, where you're kind of still on the top of the funnel, and it used to be in VC, like, hey, move fast and break things and build things where you kind of overpromise what you can deliver. I think it's actually delivering what you promise you can, right? And people want to be led, have that be self-taught or self-aware of what the value is. And so having the messaging is not saying, hey, the world, we know this is a problem, and then kind of take feedback and then kind of build a product in the background. It's having something. And you don't need to have the greatest solution of all time. It just has to provide some kind of value, right? And then you can kind of grow and add features, add value as you grow on. But I think that's kind of the most important part of, product-led kind of ground up versus, other growth strategies where you're still kind of filling the funnel. And I think that's probably appropriate times in the company's life cycle to be focused on different models. But I think today's topic, I think that's kind of when I think about it, I think you're looking at something that has some revenue, some proof of concept, and looking at scaling. And that's kind of the focus, and having that flywheel, that iterative effect, and building is very important there.
Great. And Brendan, what's your take on product-led growth or leading with the product, I should say?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what's been said thus far. I think the things I would add is going from a traditional sales-led model to this requires a ton of thinking about simplifying the product and building context quickly within the product. So that was what we worked on it almost took us a year to make that transition. And the kind of big experience was we had a pretty fast sales cycle for enterprise. We had a 3-week sales cycle on average. But even then, that was 3 weeks of building context with my sales team, right? So they were talking to me, talking to my sales team, getting understanding of how the product might work, what it would look like, what the sections of the product do. There were opportunities to have questions go back and forth. And all of that is lost effectively with product-led growth, right? They have to understand by the time they're having that first experience, they need to kind of understand all of that. And so it really comes down to making the product really, really easy to understand and putting a lot of work into understanding where the kind of beginner's mindset is coming from, right? Someone who may have just saw an ad or clicked on a piece of PR or something and stumbled across your product, right? They don't have a lot to build on. So making sure that you respect that, right? They're not stupid. They're not ignorant. They just don't know yet what someone else would have known in a traditional sales model by the time they started the software. And so just having it almost like when I talk with my product team, I talk about like the appification of the product, right? It's almost like the same way, all of us do this on our phones, right? If you downloaded a new app on your phone, no one's teaching you. There's no customer service that you're talking to most of the time, right? It's kind of walkthroughs and app queues and really basic communication that kind of teaches you how to play the game or use the trading app or whatever it is, right? And so in the same case, you kind of have to think that way, right? And I think that's just fundamentally where the market appears to be going, that people want to be in control and not be attacked by salespeople and hunted, right? And I think this is the expression of that, right? They want to be able to engage with the product at their speed. And then, of course, what we want, of course, is for them to engage and upgrade and commit and spread it to their colleagues as fast as possible. And that's where the game is making sure the product does that well.
Great. Well, what are some of the growth strategies you can use with product-led growth? Aniket, what would you call out as a couple of good examples there?
I think I'll highlight one important thing that Hall we've seen in some of the companies that we've been invested in, which is I think developing a community of your users. And I think you can attack the product-led growth strategy, by offering a freemium product, right, or offering, let's say, a trial motion. But I think at any stage, wherever growth, at whatever growth stage you are, I think the longer term benefits of having a product-led strategy, you would only be able to realize that once you start developing a community. And I know, startups as small companies, we always have limited resources, but having, investing in that upfront to, harness a community, to put together a community of individuals who are fans of your product, who not only use their product, but are also, are ready to shout at the top of their roof that, hey, I like this software, which is helping me solve my problems in the most efficient way. I think I would say that would be the number one focus as young startups are thinking about being product led.
Great. And JR? What growth strategies would you offer in this case?
Well, I'm going to answer maybe a slightly different way. Aniket mentioned, some of the ways, or maybe some of the hallmarks of a product-led, company, and about freemium trials and things of that nature. And I think as people are crafting their strategy, think about freemium, pilot periods. You could think about constraints around some features or support, for your product over a time period. And so I think in our experience, I think we have a preference, for companies that don't kind of handicap or cut features in the very beginning. I think it's important, especially on the earlier side of companies, to kind of have all the features possible. And put time limit on it for them to either increase usage or increase capacity or just flip from free to buying. But I think sometimes companies, when they come to us and say, hey, we have so many customers already and they're visiting us, we really dive into, what are they getting out of it, right? And can you point me to what value they are extracting? Because that's ultimately going to be a customer that sticks with you for life, right? And hopefully your net dollar retention's going up. And so I think as we have conversations with our companies about strategies, right, how to set it up, we're like, okay, hey, have all the features possible because you're going to get feedback from users who might value different features. And so we kind of prefer that route versus other ways of, kind of initial traction and kind of go to market. So I think that's something that we look at and have lots of conversations around. And I will say, just adding to my healthcare experience, it is hard in healthcare, right? Because you have regulations, you have committees at hospitals or whatnot. And so I do understand there's other industries and other ways where even product growth is hard. But I think there's ways to attack it and to look at the network effects, all with the end user in mind, that can still be possible there.
Great. And Brendan, what would you say about growth strategies?
Yeah, I would echo everything they said, but I would also add that referrals become a dramatically more attractive thing because, like in Cortex's previous life doing enterprise sales, we would get referrals, but they would go to the top of the sales funnel, right? And they'd spend 3 weeks in the sales process. And so it was limited fundamentally by the number of salespeople and the bandwidth of your sales team. Whereas now that limit is not there, right? So now we see customers refer each other, refer more, and there is no limit, artificial bandwidth to the size of my sales team or something that would stop that growth. And so that's been a huge difference, right? Because whereas before there was kind of like a damper on how fast that channel could grow us, now there's kind of nothing standing in the way of referrals kind of continually building on itself and being a really powerful channel for us. And so that's what we're seeing. And so that's, and that's a factor of the fact that you're getting rid of that context building. You're making sure the product succeeds on its own. And once you've done that, then it's not that you couldn't have referrals before. It's just a very different thing to see them kind of growing exponentially, which wouldn't have been possible before.
Great. So let's talk about how do you set up a product-led growth strategy at a high level? Where do you start with this? Aniket, what do you start with in this case?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll share some perspectives that we see, Hall. I think we've touched upon a couple of things here, which is around having a version of the product that is easy to set up. And it could be a lighter version of the product that you offer as a freemium version, right? Which can be out there in the market. And we've seen some companies be very successful with that. Or it could be a very short, full suite product that you can try. You can try all capabilities, all features, right, for a week or 2 weeks, and then you have to buy. So I think having that core built up, just on the product side, that is definitely one piece that you should have set up as a startup. The second piece I'd say, which is critical and sometimes gets overlooked in the early stages of the strategy, is pricing. Because as more and more companies are going to this product-led growth strategies, the pricing can kind of get convoluted as you start scaling up. And you want to make sure that you've got a pricing structure which is easy to understand, simple to measure. It's already ingrained in your product so that you don't have to have very heavy operational infrastructure set up to have customers pay you. So I think building that in a transparent way and having a pricing structure which is transparent, I would say I think that would be the second thing that you should set up. And I think we talked about having documentation, having support to make sure that the product is self-capable to support itself with having a very, very low-touch support model. I think building that in again from a ground up would be something that I think we should focus on. So I would say, I think, as companies are transitioning, either you can be an enterprise class software that is transitioning to this product-led approach and growth strategy, and we've seen that happen. It may require a lot of rewiring, at the back end to make sure that this product is set up to be successful that way. And for cloud-native companies that are coming up, that are building ground up, keeping in mind these 2 or 3 things from, as the basic fundamental building blocks of their product, I think that would take them to the next stage very fast.
Great. And JR, where would you advise someone to start with in building out their product-led growth strategy?
Well, I think pricing is actually overlooked as well. So I do want to echo that. But, I would say, I think it really starts with the organization. And I think hiring up for the right folks across different departments. And I know at the early stages, you might not hate the departments, but I think even people, being very aware of what their mission is, right? And not just hiring sales and marketing folks that feel the top of the funnel, right? And they are oriented towards, hey, we are going to lead with our product. And that's going to be the utmost importance rather than getting any qualified leads that you throw in the bucket. And then our team behind the scenes is struggling to build and fulfill the promises you made because you get compensated either through your own actual compensation or through some other metrics that you think are important. And so I think it's spending the time and talking with the team, right, about the hires you make and getting the people who are right to that kind of strategy. And again, that might not be right for you at the stage or with the product you have, but it's aligning the incentives there so that everyone is focused on product. And this could take into account changing compensation. It could take into account different KPIs, different measurements that do help the organization all understand the ultimate goal. And having the feedback, having iterations get to the product team, to the R&D, and be measured on that kind of success. And so, finance, accounting, ops, R&D, all that kind of thing. Hey, align everyone's goals the same and make sure everyone's bought into that. Because if not, I think you're going to see return on investment across departments not be what you want, and then ultimately not turn into the products of the company that you would like to see built.
Great. And Brennan, where would you advise other companies to do to get ready for product-led growth?
Yeah, I'd agree with what they said. I'd expand on it a little bit. But at first, I'd say you start with the customer, right? So to use our example, Cortex is a B2B SaaS platform that applies machine learning to stuff that is used by mostly marketers and advertisers, right? So if we wanted to sell to a strategy team or a team that is, skunk works delving into new tech, right? They would not be really interested probably in a product-led growth strategy. They'd want to meet with my lead data scientist and go deep, right? And so turning on the product-led growth strategy, if that's who I was selling to, would probably be the wrong choice from the get-go, right? Whereas in our case, if the end goal is to make every creative person, right, any marketer, any person, designer working on a photo or a video anywhere, smarter, effectively, more effective at making this content, you have to ask yourself, do they want to manipulate a bunch of data and talk to a bunch of data scientists and engineers? No, they don't, right? They don't want to talk to anybody. They think they're right. They think they're super creative. They think they're Don Draper, right? They want to sit there and, do their artsy stuff, right? And so they want something to help them. They don't want to be talked down to. They don't want to get into numbers at all, really, right? They want it to be as lightweight as possible, kind of nudging them and arming them and supporting them, right? And so for us, it was very clear once we said, okay, are we selling to these like one-off projects, exploratory guys, or are we selling to every creative on earth, right? And a bigger market, more exciting problem to solve is every creator on earth, right? So we said, okay, that's a product-led growth strategy naturally, right? And so I think you'd start there. Who are we selling to and why? And then I completely agree with everyone's point about pricing earlier. I think I'd echo or kind of like expand on that about it's not just pricing, it's packaging also, right? Which oftentimes gets conflated, but just like how they want to buy, right? So in our case, right, you take marketers and advertisers and creatives who are not very data savvy, aren't familiar with ML at all, right? All of this sounds very scary. So if we made them jump through the hoop of, okay, you need to go through this long sales cycle and have this huge commitment without being able to try something, right? That's really scary. And that's what we had to actually how we started. And that was hard. That was harder, right? But now you say, okay, the packaging is much more friendly, right? Here, try this. It's your tool. We're not going to breathe down your neck. No pressure. We're not going to tell you how to do your job. This just helps, right? That's much, much less threatening to specifically this type of customer. And so getting the packaging right was a huge thing. And then of course, pricing comes directly from that, right? If they're trying and they want to try on, individually, then okay, you're pricing per user, right? And maybe you're pricing per some other unit, or if it's the whole team's taking it on, then maybe you're pricing per team. And so to me, that's where it comes from, is kind of like, how do these people engage with your product? And if so, if it's clearly a product-led growth strategy, then fixing the pricing and the packaging to the way they prefer to engage I think makes it so much easier. And then the other thing that Aniket said, like keeping it dramatically simpler than you think it is, I think is really important.
Great. So the next question is, what is the role of data in a product-led growth strategy? JR, you want to kick us off with what your thoughts are, how data works with product growth strategy?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like everything, data is there to inform how to build the product, where to go next, how to iterate, what kind of pricing strategy to implement, to raise prices, lower prices. Data should be set up in a way to inform the teams and the company about what to focus on next. And, that can be like the champions of your company and your technology, your product. It's how do you get feedback from everybody, inside the organization, outside the organization, take that data and have it distilled or simplified into the next iteration. Or if there are significant problems, right, if there's customer support that's being done in a heavy way, you use that to prioritize fixing those kind of issues there. So, again, kind of like I said, hiring folks is all, reoriented or directed towards the product. Data is done, again, with the product in mind, the end user in mind. Take their experience and see where you can have the most impact. If that's shortening their workflow, where are they becoming more efficient? How do you quantify that? And you don't be thinking about that in the future. Think about it from ground zero and build it to actually have those data come back to the organization in some way that can be digested and then used to either evangelize that, right? And get someone who's a regular customer to become a champion and say, look how much time we're saving you, right? And so you're always thinking about having data that is set up and flows back to the organization and hitting a person that can, or hitting a silo that can use that to make it better in the future. And so that's kind of at a very high level how I'm thinking about data. And it's kind of important for us to think about both at the early stages and then, as you kind of build the organization out.
Great. And Aniket, what do you see as the role of data here?
Yeah, I think I completely echo what JR said, Hall, because data is at the center of being product-led, because you're trying to make decisions based on data and having clear ROI measurements of what the customers are gaining out of using your software. What metrics are you enabling to deliver ROI to those customers? That's absolutely one piece, but also looking, if you look intrinsic and look internally within the company, you'd also want to track data to make sure that you are making investments in the right areas and making the right decisions, right? So for example, tracking metrics like trials to conversions, like how long are they taking, what percentage of trials are happening, how are those conversions happening? That would be one critical piece. Tracking usage of customer or usage of your product. Are there metrics or data that you can see on a month-over-month basis that's trending up because customers are coming back and engaging your platform rather than just say, downloading a free software and never logging in, right, to try it. So I think driving engagement is very important, and tracking data around usage would be very critical. And absolutely, this is the heart of like any SaaS business, which is retention, churn, because these are sort of like, lagging indicators or backward looking metrics, like apart from like, trials and conversions, which are more leading indicators, but making sure that even though you're acquiring customers at the top of the funnel, you are not losing those customers and you're enhancing the lifetime value. I think, again, having very KPI and metrics driven and being very data driven is where what is needed to successfully scale the companies. And the problem, it continues to increase if you don't have the building blocks in place. And that's what we've seen in our experience, that you put the right pieces up front and then you realize the benefits, a year, 2 years later as you start scaling. So
great. And Brennan, how do you see the role of data playing here?
Yeah, I think data is critical, and it's the kind of the reason why product-led growth is so powerful. Because if you contrast the two models, if you've got a sales-led model, your data is as good as the salespeople entering it into Salesforce or whatever, right? And noticing it. And you have all these other pieces and variables, and it's not standardized or reliable. Not, you could obviously build a sales team that's good at this, but it's hard, right? Especially as you're scaling a sales team in different regions and things like that. Whereas with product-led growth, for us, from the minute we get a lead all the way through the funnel, and into specific cohorts of the product to test different features and communication strategies, you can track everything, right? So we can say, we changed this cohort to have a different type of communication up front to see if it affects the activation of the user. And you can test that in days or less, right? Depending on how many users you get. And I think that's ultimately what you're after, right? The speed at which you can turn the flywheel is what matters, right? So if you didn't have reliable data and you had required all the salespeople entered the Salesforce and required the sales manager to notice that there was a trend happening, right? That might take weeks and it might not be accurate. And you might miss something. Whereas in our case, now that we're product-led growth, we can run a sprint over the course of days and run an A/B test of 2 instances of the onboarding communication that people receive when they first get in the product and see which one's better and make that change in days, right? We have an answer in days. And so, there's no equivocation, right? It's like if the data shows that these guys are 25% more likely to upgrade or sign up or engage or refer a friend, right? Those are really valuable. And that's the entire basis of how we make our decisions and how you should be kind of moving forward.
Great. And so my next question is, what's the biggest mistake you would advise against when someone's using product-led growth? Aniket, what do you see as the biggest mistake out there that people fall into?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Hal. I feel like not seeing the whole picture or not seeing the holistic picture of where your organization is headed, probably that is the biggest mistake, because we just talked about data. We talked about every piece of data or every piece of information fits together, right? And I'll give an example. We've seen situations where companies are doing well with respect to acquiring new customers at the top. Yes, we are having a lot of trials and we are having a lot of top of the funnel traction. However, we are losing a lot of customers and the retention rates are really poor. Our churn rates are very high. So I think not seeing the holistic picture together by pulling in pieces around, trials, conversions, pricing, usage, retention, churn, all these data pieces that we just talked about, I think I would say that would be the biggest mistake, because you could have a false impression that, hey, we are acquiring good customers at the top, but then there are certain other reasons because of which you may be losing customers that need to be fixed. For you to scale successfully. You don't want to be leaking customers, right? You don't want to have a leaky bucket, because then you would never have a good LTV CAC that everybody strives for to be successful. So,
great. And JR, what do you think is the biggest mistake people make in putting together a product-led growth strategy?
I think that's like I said, it's a great question, because for me, and I kind of mentioned this before, but aligning incentives right across the organization, and because sometimes there's in the journey of a company, you're doing some early experimentation. You don't know what exactly the value is. Hopefully the team is experienced and they know some pain points, and so they develop product to get there. But it's always extremely hard to kind of know exactly what you're solving for, right? And so in the early days, you're going to experiment, and it really is going to be more, trying to get a champion, maybe not necessarily product-led or product kind of growth-oriented. It's going to be more sales and marketing, just trying to get people to listen to you, pay attention. And so, in that journey, where do you make that switch, right? And say, aha, we've got it, right? And so I've seen some companies where they maybe immaturely or prematurely, I guess I should say, kind of switch this when they still don't have the messaging right. They kind of say, okay, we got it, boom, we're going to go. And it's like a false start. And it's like, okay, they didn't really understand the value they're providing. And maybe that led to imperfect pricing where you just didn't see value there, right? And then all of a sudden they're left kind of scratching their heads. And so it is really making sure that you really understand the end users and the value you're providing there. And there's never bright line test. So you got to make sure you're going in kind of unbiased, because these teams are coming from the position where they were previously, where they knew the pain was there. But just because there is a problem doesn't mean that you're the solution that is going to be led and kind of have an network effect already in place from day 30, let's call it, right? It's going to take a little bit of time. And so I would say having the right kind of mindset and kind of ground built beneath you and being unbiased and make the decision to go to a product kind of growth strategy is very important, because there's people can point to all different types of metrics, but I've seen some out there, after around that $10 million revenue mark, then that's when they really see a project growth strategy kind of start returning the investment made earlier. And so I've seen some companies where they get to less than $1 million ARR or right around $1 million ARR, then they kind of make investments, make decisions based on that with a suboptimal user base. Well, the demographics aren't wide, and you can't make assumptions on rolling that out or scaling it up to a much larger population. So you want to make sure, like any experiment you're running, right? You want to make sure that the population you're on can be applied to even bigger populations in the market you're going after. So kind of be aware of that and aware of biases there.
Great, thanks. And Brennan, what's your take on that question? What do you think the mistake is people make there?
Yeah, I was basically that final point that JR just made is exactly my point. I think you need to know exactly who you're selling to. You need to know already that market is big enough. And kind of back to the point I made a while back, like you need to know that that's how they want to buy and that you're not doing this because you want to do it or because your VCs told you to do it. I think you need to, the reality is the customer knows, right? And if you get a bunch of customers to buy or to commit to buy or to just to show interest in buying this way versus that, that's likely where the truth is. And so to me, just making sure the tail's not wagging the dog is really important, right? And then short of that, having the data set up, right? Like when we first started our product-led growth strategy, we didn't have enough data tracking in place. So, we're like, oh, well, we're trying to answer the question of, which cohorts of the groups coming in were our best cohorts and why. And we couldn't really answer that because we didn't know what defined the best cohort of user, all these things that we hadn't really thought through. So thinking through the tracking and robustly tracking everything, even things that might seem inconsequential at first, and making sure that you have the right reasons for doing it, I think would probably be the two biggest things people could, mistakes they can avoid.
Great. Thank you, guys. Well, we're at the end of our time here for the panel today. I want to thank all of our panelists for their time, their wisdom, their experience, and appreciate all the good questions from the audience. And with that, we'll go ahead and close the panel and pass it back to Karen Deep for the starter presentations.
Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.